Good morning, everyone. My name is Yuki Tatsumi. I'm a director of the Japan program. Welcome to Stimson Center's webinar. There are a lot of people still signing on, so we will get started in just a couple of minutes. Okay, I think people may be trickling in still later, but we're going to get started because we only have an hour and we want to be respectful of everyone's time. Good morning for those of you. Happy Monday for those of you who are logging in from the United States, and good evening for if any of you are logging in from Asia. My name is Yuki Tatsumi. I'm Director of Japan Program and Co-Director of East Asia Program at Stimson Center. Welcome to the Stimson's webinar series. This 4 webinars series is made possible by the cooperation with the Embassy of Japan in Washington, D.C. So we very much like to thank for their collaboration. In the past 3 sessions, we looked at Japan's role as defender of the broader international order, Japan's view on the alliances and partnerships, and Japan's effort in upholding the multinational institutions with the specific focus on the nuclear disarmament. To finish us off, we will touch upon one of the very emerging area of national security for all countries around the world, but certainly in Indo-Pacific region, which is the concept of economic security. I'm very delighted to welcome Dr. Shiojiri, a Japan Foundation Fellow at the Woodrow Wilson Center, but then also serves as the visiting scholar and professor at Johns Hopkins SAIS, as well as visiting non-resident professor at the University of Tokyo. Shiojiri-san had spent many years distinguished service in Japanese Foreign Service, during which time he worked as a chief of protocol for Japanese ambassador to the United States, as well as directly working on the issues within the framework of G8, G20. He received his doctorate from the University of Tokyo after leaving the Foreign Service, and his dissertation was on WTO and National Security Exemption Clause, which kind of makes my head hurts, but I'm sure this will be another chance for him to come back to Stimson's webinar to give us a lecture on that one. But today, I'm delighted to have him here to hear his thoughts about this evolving concept of economic security. What does it mean? Why is it so important? And what Japan is doing to cope with this very emerging threat. So, good morning and welcome, Shiojiri-san. Welcome back from Japan, first of all.
Thank you very
I hope
much.
you had a very good visit.
Thank you.
So to start our session, if you can just share with us, what is economic security anyway? You know, we hear this term thrown around to cover a lot of things.
Mhm.
So what are the actual is there any commonly agreed definition of that?
Mhm.
And even if there is or it's not, why is it becoming so important these days?
Yeah, thank you very much. Thank you very much, Tatsumi-san and Stimson Center, first of all, for welcoming me as a panelist today. And it's great to be back to DC and great to be part of your webinars. Let me slightly switch your question to enter the definition of economic coercion, which is becoming more popular and popular these days, rather than talking directly about the economic security, which we can talk about later. during the course of the discussions. But this term is I think, fundamentally a political term and is defined differently in different contexts. So I think it is important to see what the definition is, as you said, first of all. So for example, the G7 defines economic coercion as incidents that seek to exploit economic vulnerabilities and dependencies and undermine the foreign and domestic policies and positions of G7 members as well as partners around the world. The EU, on the other hand, defines the term as a situation where a third country attempts to pressure the EU or a member state into making a particular choice of applying or threatening to apply measures affecting trade or investment against the EU or a member state. It could be summarized as attempts to weaponize economic dependencies by forcing the target state or states to comply and conform. So there's a lot of overlaps with economic security conceptions as well, I think. But economic coercion also differs from traditional tit-for-tat trade policy measures in that the coercive measures are often extra-legal and target political outcome that may not have a direct relationship to trade policy. Such attempts are both old and new, and it is old in a sense that coercive measures are an old and well-documented element of economic statecraft, which is another term related to this field, which is generally defined as the use of economic incentives and disincentives in the pursuit of foreign policy goals. At the same time, current trends also show new and concerning elements. First, past eras of rampant economic coercion largely predate the foundation of the World Trade Organization, WTO, which was part of my dissertation, and the current rules-based international order. In this sense, economic coercion is an attack on the international rule of law and is also part of unilateral attempts to change the status quo that ultimately risk undermining global security and stability. Second, instances of economic coercion are increasing over time, led especially by the PRC. According to reports by a German think tank called MERIX and an Australian think tank called ASPI, and also German Mansfield Foundation here in DC, more than 100 cases are identified as PRC's coercive measures in the past decade. So you can see how the volume is piling up. Japan was the target of one of the earliest of these cases. On September 7, 2010, a Chinese fishing boat collided with two Japanese Coast Guard vessels in the East China Sea, and the Chinese captain of the fishing boat was detained by Japanese authorities. As tensions between China and Japan arose, Chinese customs officials halted shipments of so-called rare earth elements from China to Japan, a clear example of using non-transparent and coercive economic tool to pursue a political outcome. Other examples include, but not limited to, the import ban imposed on bananas and pineapples against the Philippines, which was in 2012, import suspensions or delays of wine and other against Australia in 2017 and 2020, and customs blockage against Lithuanian exports in 2021, which also threatened to undermine the EU single market. A third element of what is new about modern economic coercion is the context in which it is taking place. The international flow of goods, people, and ideas has been a fact of life in human civilization, but the speed at which commerce moves in the modern world and the intricate interdependencies within complex modern supply chain is unprecedented in history, as we all know. As a result, the ripple effect of economic coercion in this new system are harder to predict than ever before, and so the risk of unintended negative consequences is extremely high, particularly for emerging and developing economies. That was a lengthy answer to your first question, but let me stop here for your first question.
Great, thank you so much. Yes, so if that is the case, how can country respond to such behavior imposed by another country? Because it does, you just laid out that, it just has a ripple effect, not just by one country's trade, but then it could impact quite heavily on the regional aspect as well.
Yes, true. And it's a very difficult question and $1 million question probably, which is hard to answer and always easier said than done. But I think it is useful to start by thinking clearly about how economic coercion is used at a tactical level. Coercive economic measures are deployed in informal ways and are often vague in terms of their objectives. They are typically targeted against smaller economies and in sectors where asymmetric advantages are perceived in the supply chain. Although some scholars have made convincing arguments that economic coercion rarely leads to specific concessions and generates limited macroeconomic effect. These analyses often overlook a significant problem of silent evidence, namely decisions made by countries or companies not to pursue certain courses of action out of fear of provoking retaliation, the so-called chilling effect. This is one reason why focusing on upholding free trade principles and the rule of law and then responding to coercive measures on an ad hoc basis may be insufficient as an approach, especially in terms of protecting smaller economies. How then can we effectively respond to coercive measures? That is the question that you posed to me. But I think deterrence theory would suggest two possible approaches, denial versus punishment. Deterrence by denial seeks to achieve deterrence by ensuring that action is unlikely to succeed and thereby persuading the aggressor the action is not worth pursuing. In the context of economic coercion, policies to promote deterrence by denial may include identifying and reducing asymmetric dependencies in trade with states engaging in economic coercion, deepening economic ties with allies and partners, and creating institutional mechanisms to support targets of economic coercion through subsidizing or increasing purchases of affected goods and services. In contrast, deterrence by punishment seeks to deter an aggressive action by threatening severe penalties if an attack occurs, thereby raising the cost of action through fear of punishment. Retaliative measures may include responding to threats or early signs of coercive measures by issuing a joint statement condemning such behaviors, imposing new or additional tariffs, introducing travel or tourism restrictions, or imposing outright bans on certain exports. In order to enhance the deterrence potential of such arrangements, it is even possible to envision some form of economic collective self-defense, similar to the collective self-defense provisions contained in Article 5 of the North Atlantic Treaty, which is the foundation of the NATO. These efforts to develop deterrence, especially punitive deterrence, are not without risk and could lead to escalation of tensions and various other unintended consequences. From my perspective, this suggests an emphasis on deterrence by denial should be the first resort for the US, Japan, and allies, but that building habits of cooperation and communication related to the deployment of punitive measures should be also a priority. The key element of deterrence is to clearly communicate and maintain credibility regarding the imposition of defensive measures as well as threats of punitive retaliations. In doing so, we also need to make continuous efforts to achieve escalation dominance and thereby deter escalation in the first place, while also leaving paths for retreat and de-escalation. In this context, it is encouraging to see the US, Japan, and other countries accelerating their efforts to work together to accomplish these challenging goals, though there remains a lot of work left to do.
Thank you. So if that's the way that, the way that you just laid out options for the countries to respond to economic coercion. So bring it back closer to home. What has Japan been doing than its own responses, whether on its own or in cooperation with the other countries, like including the United States?
Yeah. Thank you. Probably I should start with an example that I raised earlier, which was the 2010 example. And as mentioned earlier, Japan received an early wake-up call regarding the dangers of economic coercion in September 2010. And 1 month later, the Japanese government implemented a policy package to enhance the resilience of its rare earth mineral supply chain. The package included efforts to diversify its rare earth supply network, develop and promote technologies to reduce the use of rare earths, stockpile rare earths to ensure reserves of critical minerals, and among others. Japanese dependencies on Chinese rare earth remains relatively high, but is significantly lower than what it was prior to the 2010 incidents. This case highlights the significant vulnerabilities inherent in the then structure of Japanese economy and international economic relations. In response, Japanese politicians and bureaucrats began to develop and implement policies for economic security and to promote that idea, aiming to realize an economic structure that would better support the protection of Japan's national interests, such as peace, security, and economic prosperity. So let me lay out some of the key features of the Japan strategy as it has developed so far, which is under the notion of the whole of government approach to protect economic security with several core principles. The core principles include number one, strategic autonomy, number two, strategic indispensability, and number three, promotion of free and open international order. This strategy is anchored in the Economic Security Promotion Act passed in May 2022, which is organized into 4 pillars, which I will not go into much to detail. The Japanese government has also enacted substantial additional measures to promote strategic industries and is in the process of developing a security clearance program that aims to both better protect critical Japanese technologies and enable deeper and more robust technology cooperation with like-minded countries. Japan has also emerged as a leader in building international consensus on economic security and against economic coercion among like-minded countries, most notably during its G7 host year in 2023 that produced the first leaders' statement on economic security and economic resilience. This effort was anchored in deep US-Japan cooperation, where economic security has become a major theme running through engagements, including the US-Japan Leaders Summit in May 2023 and the Economic 2+2 in November 2023. The topics of economic security and economic coercion will also certainly be discussed during Prime Minister Kishida's state visit in April, which is coming up in two weeks or so, and will present a fertile ground for further deepening US-Japan partnerships. Let me stop here in terms of laying out some of the Japanese strategies and some of the cooperation that Japan is doing with other countries.
Great. Thank you so much. This is a great way to start. For those of you in the audience, if you have a question, please feel free to start typing in, using the Q&A section. Please do not use chat function. That one is saved for my or Shiojiri-san's communication with the Stimson's communication team in case some communication trouble happens, like internet instability and things. So please do stay away from that, but please do, by all means, start typing your questions into Q&A. So there already is a comment/question coming in. It's regarding China, because a lot of the example that you gave on the outset about the past representation of the economic coercion has been coincidentally or uncoincidentally by PRC. But some might argue that when China resort to these kind of behaviors, sometimes it is driven more by ideology as opposed to practical policy purpose. And given the nature of its economic structure, which is very different from a market-driven economy by most democracies, it really doesn't have to answer to the domestic market forces in the way that democratic governments will. So and then I think I can probably say the similar thing about perhaps Russia. So how would democracies still counter to the economically coercive behavior by those countries if they are not held, if they are not being held accountable to domestic audience as much as the receiving end, which are often, very subject to, domestic constituency about their economic vitality, corporate profit, and so forth.
Yeah, thank you very much for that question, which is difficult to answer. But I think the first point that I want to make is that China and Russia and other countries also will have to take care of their economies and will be aware of the economic negative effects if they are to be adopting economic coercive actions or other matters or to be targeted for that as well. It is vice versa. And also, I mentioned at the outset that it is a political term that I believe that from a different point of view, it could be perceived in a different way. Having said that, I think I mentioned earlier again, but I think economic effects are also of their concern for China and Russia and other countries, but also reputational risk is also of their concern to some extent. If they are to pursue some economic coercive actions, and if they are not to accomplish their goals, if they are to set a clear goal, which is often not the case, and if they are not to accomplish that, maybe the domestic audience will not be happy about what the current administration or the government is doing, which could harm their reputational risk, which is actually harmful for their political power. So I think it is idealistic. Yes, it is. But I think they are also looking into some of the effects and whether it is cost effective or not will come into their mind when they pursue such policy options.
Thank you. So this conversation, including your opening remarks, really centered on economic coercive behavior from the PRC. From Japanese perspective, have you point to any indicators of cooperation or coordination between Russia and China against Japan when it comes to these kind of behaviors?
Yep. Thank you for the question. I do not have a clear answer to this, but there seems to be a little coordination between Russia and China at this point in terms of economic coercion or economic security at this point. But it is possible that there could be some coordination starting in order to pursue their policy goals, which may well seem like a Cold War era in terms of the economic blockage. Which should be avoided. And that is the point that I mentioned about de-escalating the situation. Yes, this is an important topic to discuss. And US and Japan and allies should also discuss about how to counteract the economic coercion or economic security measures across the allies. But I think it is also important to see how we can avoid escalation or the economic blockage situation and pursue free and open international trade order. What was the objective of the WTO system, which still is alive.
Thank you. So in line of that, because this is an economic tool, not the kinetic military tool that countries can use to coerce other countries into certain behavior and thinking and decisions, sometimes it is hard to call it, make a judgment on whether it is just one of the just competitive behavior, the competitive trade behavior versus it is really getting into the realm of coercion. So how does Japan, you think, define the threshold of economic competitive behavior vis-a-vis coercive behavior?
Mhm. That is another good question and a difficult question to answer. What's the threshold and what's the definition question comes back in loop. But I think maybe we can think about what is the difference between economic sanctions and economic coercions. Maybe if I could step back a little, as economic sanctions were more traditionally there for a while, and maybe economic coercion is a new term that we are starting to use. But I think in terms of economic sanctions, it legally speaking, it could be at least neutral, or sometimes it's legal, or sometimes it's illegal. But I think sanctions could be divided into two categories if we are to speak in a very general term. One category is that a sanction is based on UN Security Council resolution, which has the international legal foundation, therefore is a legal act. The second category is sanctions without a basis of the UN Security Council resolution, unilateral, unilateral, or multilateral, which could be thought as a illegal term, but if it is a countermeasure to a illegal act under the international law, if it passes the reasonability test or the test according to the legal fora, then it could be accounted as a legal act. So at least it has a neutral connotation in terms of economic sanctions. As opposed to that, I think economic coercion has a negative connotation from the definition. Alluding to that, I think the second point that I mentioned about the definition of economic coercion is that it tends to be vague. And the correlations between the methods and objectives sometimes are very unclear, that it is not sure, the companies or individuals or countries are not sure what should be done in order to avoid such situation, which makes it harder to counteract economic coercion. So here I'm going back into the loop, so not answering your question at all. But I think it really depends on how you see and define, and which is a political term, as I said. So I think what amounts to coercion, what amounts to an action that will allow counteraction is something of a political nature, and which needs to be discussed further, I think.
Thank you. So you talked about Japan's wake-up call on Chinese coercive economic behavior. There's a question about and then also you laid out how Japan responded to that, package to in an effort to diversify the import sources of rare earth and so forth. Do you think Japan saw any changes in Chinese behavior in response to, after Japan took those measures? And since 2020, there is a broader corporations amongst the G7 and its partners, economic coercion or response to that is often talked about in more broader broader arena. So do you detect any change in the Chinese behavior in the way that you talked about this, I guess, a deterrent effect in a way?
Yeah, thank you. For the first part of your question, in terms of the 2010 incident, whether that the Japanese countermeasures or the package that I explained had an effect in terms of the Chinese action, then I think in terms of the specific actions that in 2010, what happened between China and Japan, I think Chinese actions has not changed, and that the countermeasures has not have an effect of countering the claim by China. But I think the importance of the Japanese counteraction was to avoid the second incidence of such kind of nature. So I think it is more on the defensive side of Japan that could have been effective. Having said that, the Japan's reliance on the Chinese rare earth still remains high, relatively high, around 60% or so, which is still high considering the other possibilities. So I think there's some more to be done, but at least there are some efforts that are being done. And regarding the second part of your question regarding development on the G7 and other for countermeasures for economic coercion or economic security and how that affects Chinese or Russia's or other parts of the world's reaction to that. I think there are some cautions, more cautions in terms of deploying such actions, economic coercion, which is part of the deterrence effects are in place. Having said that, I think the actions are becoming more and more vague, and the relationship between the measures, economic measures, and the objectives are being very unclear, which is tactically very shrewd, and it is that comes back to the definition point, how difficult it is to define what economic coercion is and economic security measures are, which makes it even more difficult to counteract such measures. Having said that, I think it is important to be aware of the vulnerabilities, the possibilities of economic coercion, and to be prepared for any cases as such. In the meantime, promoting free trade and the rule of law in order to avoid escalation of the situation.
Thank you. So you talked about the cooperation, kind of a region-wide cooperation, because it sounds like this kind of this kind of a course of economic behavior is really difficult to change if only one country takes some kind of response, right? It needs to be in partnership. So there is a great two-part question coming in on that one. So last August, when at the Camp David Summit, one of the things that the leaders of the US, Japan, and Korea talked about was the early warning system against economic coercions. Do you know much about to what extent this discussion has made a progress amongst the three governments to this day? That's part one. And part two, particularly when you look at smaller countries, like, countries in Southeast Asia, it is just much difficult for them to have a capacity to react or respond. Is there any case you've seen in Southeast Asia to take a more of a collective ASEAN-wide approach to make their trade or economy more resilient to such pressure? Or is Japan doing anything to work with these countries to help them toward that goal?
Thank you very much. As you said, these are great questions and difficult to answer as well. But the first part of your question about the Camp David and US-Japan Korea relations, it is very encouraging to see this relationship developing, and that I do see a potential for this being institutionalized, and that there are development in terms of the early warning system in terms of economic coercion, economic security as well. Having said that, I am not aware of the particular or concrete contents of this program, and we'll have to do further study about it. But I hopefully that these will be publicized in the near future when they have the next summit meetings or any occasion of the ministerial meetings as well. Because I think it's in general at the summit level, they are agreeing on to this system, and probably it is the time for the three countries to operationalize such system, which comes down to a ministerial level or the official level to strike down the details, which is always the hard part. Easier said than done. The second part, in terms of the smaller economies and how to support their capacities. In Southeast Asia in particular, the question was about the ASEAN approach. I'm not aware of a particular ASEAN-specific approach, but I am aware of the IPEF movement. Maybe that could be part of the answer to this question, which is some of the ASEAN countries are part of the IPEF. So maybe that is not a complete approach to this, but some of the approach. And IPEF, the Indo-Pacific Economic Framework Supply Chain Agreement was done last year. And they have a supply chain council as well as the supply chain crisis response network. So these councils and networks could be the basis of such networks and support system in order to help the smaller regions or countries in order to respond to such actions. And to this extent, what is Japan doing was also part of the question. And maybe I shouldn't go too much into detail, but the ODA's new charter was developed last year, and also they developed OAS, which is a little different from this context. But I think Japan's development assistance option is there in order to support. And maybe alluded to that, US is also making efforts in terms of assisting those who are affected by economic coercion, coercive actions. And last year in the National Defense Authorization Act, NDAA, some of the task force for countering economic coercion was established. And this year, in 2023, the bill was also introduced, which is called Countering Economic Coercion Act of 2023. So these are some of the actions that the US is also trying to do in order to help the smaller economies that are affected by these actions.
Thank you. So kind of bring the focus back to Japan for a little bit. There are two specific questions. So as we all know, China continues to ban import of Japanese seafood. Would you, in your view, is this economic coercion, or is this more about, for the lack of a better word, politically driven harassment because of current tension between the two countries? So that's question number one.
Mm-hmm.
Two, why WTO or other 10 FTAs, maybe exclusive RCEP, have not been able to deter or effectively respond to these economically coercive behavior, do you think?
Thank you for another great set of questions, which is difficult to answer. The first part of the question, whether this amounts to coercion or is this a political harassment, which is your word that you use. But I believe it really depends on which political idea you have and what sort of standard do you stand aside to. So it could be, again, a political discussion. So this is not a legal discussion, and a political discussion is what I'm trying to stress here. But I think it does, it could be seen as a coercion if I am to use a term of the G7, which is to use the economic measures in order to pressure the other country or region in order to comply or conform. And therefore, there should be some countermeasures for that. And in order to do that, Japan needs to act and is acting in order to countermeasure such actions. And I didn't really discuss about this, but I think the Japanese economic security actions can be divided into 4 pillars. Number 1 is to know, number 2 is to protect, number 3 is to promote, number 4 is to partner, which I have spoken in other forums as well. But the first one is to know your vulnerabilities, to know how much dependent are you to the market, not only Chinese markets, but other markets as well. And to promote, to protect is to knowing your vulnerabilities, to think about the countermeasures or other ways to supply the sources or the market if there is to be a coercive measures. and to promote is to strengthen your industry, fishing industry in this sense, in order for their export activities and such. And to partner is obviously to partner with the like-minded countries, including the US. So I think these four measures are done and needs to be done even further. In terms of the second question, why are the current international fora are not effective in responding to such actions? I think maybe I could talk about my dissertation a little bit about the WTO National Security Exemption Clause.
There you go. Take it away.
Here we go. We'll be quick. But in terms of the WTO, if an action or economic measure is to be of a nature which discriminates against other countries, then it is per se illegal in terms of the WTO law. But it could be allowed under the National Security Exemption Clause, Article 21 of the GATT 1994 to be specific, which allows member countries to take economic measures under the reasons of national security, which is laid out in Article 21. And so the WTO dispute settlement system was to make judgments or make views in terms of whether one action is allowed or not. But that function is not functioning for many reasons. But first is the article itself is an ambiguous article, so that there are multiple interpretations done. And US, for example, thinks that it is so ambiguous that anything is okay in terms of that article, and that there shouldn't be WTO dispute settlement bodies should not be the one to judge such actions. Which other countries, including EU, has different views, and they think that WTO should play more roles in terms of making statements in terms of those national security measures. So that could be part of the WTO reform, if there is any, and could be thought as one way to strengthen the WTO process. But again, it is difficult to determine what interpretations are the correct interpretation in terms of WTO law. And I think the similar thing can be said about other forums as well. How political it is, and national security measures are at the core of the sovereign rights. So it is, of course, difficult to give up some of the sovereign rights or the judgments moving forward. So that is the difficulties that lies in this field as well.
Thank you. So staying on the what's going on with Japan for a little bit. So in order for any country, including Japan, to, I guess you talked about the 4-point strategy, and one was to protect, right?
Mm-hmm.
So it really takes a partnership with the private industries, and part of that is maybe in order to make the private sector more resilient to such behavior, sometimes you may have to ask companies to pay higher prices for a supplier to have a more stable supply chain, for example. Do you think is Japanese private sector open to that idea, or if they're a little hesitant because it is a cost on them, is Japanese government doing anything to help them, kind of ease that pain, if you will? And would it be, and then also there is a recent trend that there's a increasing Chinese investment in key sectors in Japan, like hospitality industry, retail, real estate. So what measures has the Japanese government implemented to kind of monitor, regulate, and restrict those kind of investment? In US, for national security related, potentially national security impacted cases, there is a advisory board called CFIUS, but I don't think Japan still has that kind of body yet. So what is Japan doing to, kind of make sure that these investments are kind of stay in the kind of a, purely business related investment, if you will.
Thank you.
So
Thank you
those are
for
another two complicated questions. Sorry.
Yeah, very complicated. I feel like I'm getting all the difficult questions. But I think really to the first question, sorry, which was about the private industry and the cost for the industry itself. And I think when we talk about economic coercion and economic security, we tend to think about country to country level, but it really is on the company level, company level, industry level, and individuals as well. And the high prices, whether private companies are willing to pay or not, is really a business decisions, which cannot be really defined by the country or to be pressed on. So I think the best the government could do is to promote the idea of economic security, economic coercion, and to alert the possibilities, and therefore ask or at least make aware some of the industries or companies that could be the target of such actions. And then it is up to the industry or the companies to make their business decisions, whether it is better to rely more on different sources or to pursue other paths as well. And I didn't really go into detail about Japan's different stance on China, but here I'm not trying to be anti-China, but also trying to be more objective in terms of what the relationship is. And actually, compared to the US, Japan it faces certain level of incentives to hedge in international economic relations, most notably by maintaining stronger ties with the PRC, with China, compared to the US. And I think in the US, there are the presidential elections coming up, which is the topic of the town, of course, that there are stoking economic national sentiments in the US, which is reducing the space for strategic economic cooperation, even with close allies such as Japan. So, which is some other topics. But I think there are strong sentiments on the Japan side and the company and industries in particular that the ties with China is important, and we do need to promote the friendship with China with the caution of certain economic coercive actions. So the best scenario, of course, is to deepen the friendship with China as well as other countries and parts of the world, and to enhance international free trade and economy, which was the idea of WTO again. But the current trend seems to be different. And in order to be prepared for such economic coercive actions and risks for economic security, measures needs to be taken. And that is, again, a business choice as well as political choice on the government level. But I think what we need to concentrate and focus more and talk about more is the company level, individual level, as you mentioned in your question. And moving forward to the second part of the question, what Japan is doing in order to counteract some of the measures related to some CFIUS related measures in the US, and whether there's are equivalent in Japan. I think the major law in Japan that needs to be seen in terms of this is FEFTA, the Foreign Exchange and Foreign Trade Act, which is at the core of some of the export controls or the review of investments as well. And I think recently Japan is trying to strengthen its reviewing system and the export control system as well, together with the Economic Security Promotion Act, which was passed in May 2022. So there still remains to be a lot to be done, but I think there are some improvements made over the course of the years, especially with the early wake-up call, as I mentioned, in 2010, and the lead up to at this moment in order to strengthen its economic security. And I think the relationship with the U.S. and emulating some of the systems that U.S. has been very helpful for Japan as well.
So we keep going back to this 2010 wake-up call over the rare earth. So as you may know, there was recently an interesting suggestion made by the leaders of the Taliban for Japan to invest in Afghanistan to use its mines for metals and minerals to compete with Chinese miners who are vying for market share. What do you think of that idea? It is kind of an interesting one.
Very, very interesting. I think that is a difficult question to answer, but I think whether that option is economically viable, whether that does not have political stability issues or not, some other elements should be taken into consideration. But I think it is one of the options that Japan and other countries should be looking into in terms of diversifying the sources of rare earth minerals. And this is not only to in response to the economic coercive actions, but also to make sure that we have access to different sources and options in case there are any disruptions in terms of the supply chain, not only with the political will or political objectives, but also there could be some natural disasters or unintended consequences or effects to the supply chain. So I think it is very important to diversify the supply chain sources anyway. So I think everything tends to be more politicized and all, and I am probably guilty of that, doing that in myself. But I think it is important in terms of the business strategy to have that diversification mindset moving forward. And I think related to that, some say that the Japanese business mind of just on time has changed to just in case, which I thought was a interesting thing. I cannot quote, I don't remember which quote that was, but I think that is an interesting way of looking at business at modern times.
Right. So earlier in this conversation, we talked, there was a question about what U.S. Japan ROK have been doing since three leaders agree on the early warning system, kind of for economic coercion. But already under Prime Minister Suga, within the Quad framework, there is, supply chain resiliency is one of the key area that the Quad country have already agreed to cooperate upon. Do you think you can, those four countries can also leverage this Quad framework to partner on the partner or discuss or coordinate, collaborate on the response to potential economic coercion as well?
Yes, thank you very much. And I did not mention in my opening remarks and all about the Quad, but I think that is one of the frameworks that is active in terms of looking into this area. And as you said, in May 2023, Quad also made a joint statement in terms of the leader statement, and they alluded to the I'm quoting the Quad International Standards Cooperation Network and the Quad Principles on Critical and Emerging Technology Standard, which was released in May 2023. So these are some of the concrete ideas and actions taken by Quad and other frameworks. So I think Quad has a place to move forward in this area as well. And I'm not directly asking your question, but I think there are some allies and partners that are working in this area, and I think another thing that if I could mention is the G7 minus Italy. I think six countries also made a ministerial statement in terms of enhancing their the cooperation in terms of countering economic coercion and economic security. So I think that is another area of cooperation that is done.
Thank you. And I think since we only have like 5 minutes left, we only have probably this will be the last question for this conversation. But as you alluded to, there is a very kind of blurring of the lines between whether that's competitive behavior versus economic coercion, or also economic coercion and control, economic coercion versus some punitive, purely punitive measures for one reason or the other, like the mobilization of the sanctions, or really kind of a mutually retaliatory, like countries slapping on taxes or tariff against each other over certain issue, over certain disagreement on trade issues. And that historically has been done by many countries, including Japan, US, South Korea, even among those market democracies. But how can these different types of economic behavior be distinguished and differentiated, both theoretically and also in a concrete policy perspective? I think that's big enough to be your last question.
Right, big enough and also very difficult to answer, and probably I will not be able to answer in full extent. But I think it is important to understand and to be mindful of the fact that this concept of economic security, economic coercion is of a political nature, and that is not a fixed term or a legal term, and to be mindful of that, and therefore be mindful of the fact that it could lead to escalation of the situation, to focus too much on the concept itself. But as you said, we should look into not country to country, not only country to country, but also company to company, individuals to individuals. What are the economic effects? What are the actual effects that are happening? Instead of just looking into a major picture of the economic coercion or security, and to escalate the situation unintentionally. So I think that is one way to answer your question. But another thing is that I think the economic coercion and the hike of the numbers of actions which could be seen as economic coercion is the challenge to the current international order, international rule of law, and the challenge to the status quo, which includes WTO law, which needs reform as well. But I think from that perspective, it is important to see how we could collaborate among the like-minded countries, as well as across the allies, if there's any adversaries, that how could we advance the free trade and come back to the international rule of law in terms of trade, as well as how to diversify those risks, if there's any, to minimize, not only on the country level again, but to think about the company level and the individual level. So this is not really a clever conclusion, but I think to be mindful of the economic coercion, economic security, talking about it is important, but also thinking beyond the concept, and also thinking about de-risking or de-escalating the situation is of a importance at this time.
Thank you. Well, I have to say, record number of questions, 16.
Thank you.
I've never seen this actively engaged audience. I think this is probably the most actively engaged audience that I've seen in this four webinar series.
Wonderful.
Yeah, very specific, concrete, great questions from everybody. So thank you so much for everyone who posed a question that are also challenging.
Yes.
And I can tell, Shiojiri-san was struggling a little bit, but I hope this will also help Shiojiri-san to think a little bit more as he continue to work on these issues.
Yes.
But he's also For those of you who have signed on to more than one of this 4 series, all the speakers are currently working on the commentaries that are on this very topic that we had these conversations over the course of the month. We will be rolling out the commentaries once we edit and make sure that it's in the it has the and our edits are approved by the authors and so forth. But you will see that being released probably one by one over the next several weeks, and we will probably start sending out the program updates as those commentaries are being released. So with that, thank you everyone for all these great questions, challenging questions and thought-provoking questions. And thank you most of all for Shiojiri-san to persevere and prevailed in this barrage of questions.
Prevail. Thank you very much.
That was incredibly impressive.
Thank you.
So thank you so much. And thank you.